All right, y'all, good morning. Thanks for popping in. We'll get started as soon as the clock strikes the hour. All right, there we go. So hi there, thank you for joining us. We're still here at Mid-Career, the retention of academic librarians of color and our lived experiences. We will be interchangeably using the phrases BIPOC librarians, Black, Indigenous, people of color, librarians of color, and racialized librarians, as those are terms relevant in different countries, places, or institutions. And if you identify as any of those things, please use an asterisk ahead of your question in the chat so we can prioritize your questions at the end. Next, we'll move on to our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we did our research in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is on the traditional lands of at least 15 bands of Southern Paiute or Nulu tribes who were descendants of Tadunu or desert people. These lands were first claimed by Mexico, and the lands and people were disrupted by trade routes, the Mexican-American War, the Mormons, the railroad, and the so-called founders and original permanent settlers of Las Vegas. The colonization brought disease and death to the indigenous people, especially tuberculosis and the measles. It brought destruction of their land and resources and erasure of the culture through forced assimilation to white American culture. We are guests on this land and have committed ourselves to listening to and supporting the indigenous people through financial contributions to the Las Vegas Indian Center, participating in collection development practices that honor indigenous identities and ways of knowing in the present tense, and by asking the University of Nevada, Las Vegas to offer Southern Paiute language classes. On to introductions. So I'll start first. My name is Brittany Sterling, she, her, and I'm the Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies Librarian at UNLV.
My name is James Cheng, he, him, and I just started as a data analyst at the Library of Congress, and I was previously a library data analyst at UNLV. To be safe, I will be stating that my participation is personal and the contents of the presentation and my own thoughts do not reflect the Library of Congress's policy or positions in any way.
And my name is Brittany Paloma Fiedler. My pronouns are she, her, aya, and I am a teaching and learning librarian at UNLV as well. So in our lit review, we found two interesting quotes 5 years apart. In 2007, the literature on the retention of minorities in academic librarianship is weak and close to non-existent. And in 2012, research on the retention of academic librarians of color is practically non-existent. One challenge is that there's not an established definition of mid-career, which James will discuss later. The research that exists tends to focus on the recruitment and/or hiring stages. The few writings about retention strategies generally suggest mentorship and/or leadership development. Unfortunately, these strategies often target or are perceived as targeting early career librarians. Additionally, many mentors are untrained and ineffective, and many librarians have no interest in leadership. At the end of this presentation, we have a very thorough bibliography for further reading. However, the retention of mid-career academic librarians of color as a distinct topic has not received enough attention. This project was sponsored by ALA Audlas through a diversity research grant, which allowed us to offer a gift card to our BIPOC participants in exchange for their time and labor. Paying BIPOC librarians will be a theme throughout this presentation. We started with a screening tool where we ensured that participants were current or former academic librarians in the US or Canada, self-identified as mid-career, and are people of color. We also utilized the tool to randomly invite participants to interview. After these randomized interviews, we selected participants because they had an attribute that wasn't already represented in our pool. So ultimately, we chatted with 25 people in semi-structured interviews, and they worked at a variety of institutional types, including tribal colleges and HBCUs. 3 of our participants were at the top of library leadership, while 8 had no supervisory duties whatsoever, and everyone else was in between. So we also used snowball sampling to find participants who left librarianship or academia. Of those 25 that we interviewed, 4 had left. 1 is working in retail and wants to go into K-12 education. 2 are in the nonprofit sector, and 1 is working in a government library. Our methodology for this project is we transcribe the interviews in order to do a qualitative analysis through coding. We are still in the very, very early, very preliminary stages of that analysis. So for this presentation, we did one round of in vivo coding, which means our codes are all direct quotes. Then we did a second round of descriptive coding related to the topics of this presentation. So we're going to continue to analyze our data and share our findings, and our next presentation will be at the CALM conference this summer. This presentation will start with the lighter topics like defining mid-career and how white people can help their BIPOC colleagues, and then move into heavier topics of microaggressions, racism, and structural change.
So one of our research questions was about defining and understanding mid-career from the perspective of academic librarians of color in this stage. So we asked our participants the following questions. How would you define early career and mid-career in academic libraries? Is there importance in attaining mid-career status to you? And when does mid-career end? Although not the focus, we heard about early career and late career and included those stages in our analyses. Many of our participants began with a numerical range. However, some gave a singular number and some gave a description, such as mid-career starts post-tenure. There were also 4 participants who did not give any numbers for any of the stages. While we were not interested in pinning down a statistically accurate definition, we compiled this table summarizing what our participants said. We can see the number of people who gave an answer for a particular career stage, the range, average, and median. The ranges overlap about 5 years and are dispersed. Typically, early career is about the first 5 years. Then mid-career lasts 10 years after that, and then late career starts 10 years after that. While helpful, it does not reflect the true answer that many participants gave, which was, I don't know. They could only hazard a guess and equivocate. We will dive into how our participants personally thought through the career stages and what themes and categories arose. I won't go into detail for every theme and category, nor read every quote for the sake of time, but they are still on the slides for later review. So, as we must, we will start at the beginning. Our participants found it useful to have the early career stage as a foil in understanding the mid-career stage. I'll squish the first 3 themes of early career that we found into this one slide because we've sort of all been there, right? How our participants described early career was familiar. It was a time of figuring out their jobs and themselves, learning norms, doing basic tasks and uninspiring work, and feeling hope, idealism, anxiety, and stress. One thing I will expand on is that the line between early career and mid-career seemed easy to define. This is because professional organizations and some institutions have created programs, scholarships, or other initiatives which specifically target early career librarians and thus define the number of years. Many have explicitly said they knew what stage they were in by whether they could apply. For example, one participant said, I feel like I'm only mid-career now because I don't qualify for all the early career stuff. It's when you age out of the programming and the support that comes nationally or comes from different professional organizations around for career development opportunities. In general, participants were well aware of the somewhat arbitrary and constructed nature of these different stages. Early, mid, or late career could shift depending on many different factors, such as if someone changes jobs frequently, whether a library has tenure-track status, or even changes to the retirement age. So we'll move on to mid-career next. Nearly all of our participants spoke positively of this period of time and how it typically improved their lives in almost every aspect. But mid-career was also described as a long and ambiguous time for them. Most positively, mid-career rewarded our participants with more money, better job security, increased status, and autonomy over their work. The increased financial security was one of the most meaningful things about mid-career for our participants. Money came up consistently as a topic, with our participants saying, for example, money. The only way that you can get a nice raise is by going up in faculty rank. Money is a big thing, and librarians and educators aren't the highest paid people. Of course, even though our participants said they earned more in mid-career, they still felt that it was not enough and were well aware of the low pay in the profession. One participant who left said, financially, 100%. They were paying us bottom range as a diversity resident, and I knew that. As a teacher, as a school librarian, I was making way more than I was as an academic librarian. I was under the impression that university librarians got paid a lot more. That's a lie, right? I knew staying there wasn't an option because I have children, I have a family, I'm a caregiver, and you can't survive in my city on that pay raise, on that pay salary. Two categories in this theme were also about self-determination and prestige. Many participants recognize that being a mid-career academic librarian often afforded them autonomy in their work and increased social status, such as respect. So mid-career was also described as a period of professional flourishing, with many saying they felt more confident that they gained the abilities and skills to do their work and increased responsibilities. For this theme, I combined the categories for brevity as well. Our participants said they found stability in mid-career. They could speak their minds and push back more. With increasing mastery of their skills, they started directing others with their work. They are out in the world, maybe even at this very conference, sharing their work for the betterment of the profession. They described it like so. The bigger piece is the feeling professionally, I am not a novice anymore. That confidence, I think, is a big thing that comes with being at this point in my career. Although our participants spoke of the following categories separately, there seemed to be a connection between how they described feeling less supported themselves while at the same time desiring to mentor others. So while we just heard that mid-career was associated with many positive things, some participants felt the loss of support that people in the early career received, because when you're mid-career, you are expected to have it together all the time. One person said, mid-career begins after tenure because the support systems change and the dialogue changes. While another noted, in terms of mid-career, I feel like that's the point where you are expected to do more, usually with less, usually with little guidance. So perhaps in response to the loss of support of their support systems, participants felt that they needed to become the support for others. They felt strongly about becoming mentors or giving advice, especially to early career librarians of color. For example, a participant said, I think I feel at mid-career because I'm at a point where I can start helping the next generation of either early career or people who are thinking about the profession. And I'm really honest with them. I don't want anyone to step into this profession without understanding where they're going. That's an unfortunate thing to do, especially a person of color. It's so rewarding, but there are so many challenges. Although not reflected in their numerical definitions, participants also described a sense of malaise with mid-career, which manifested in feeling like the stage dragging in time or feeling directionless. To summarize the categories in this theme, our participants sometimes felt stuck in mid-career and thus aimless. On the other hand, some could not shake the feeling of being early career. One participant said they had to intentionally accept that they are mid-career, saying, I had to define what I felt was my mid-career. And I think right now, I'm at the very beginning of what I consider being able to say for myself, you are in your place. So late career, and like with early career, while we did not focus our research on late career, we still wanted to understand it a little more. When we asked them, when does mid-career end? The most commonly given response was, I don't know again. But our participants suggested that many of the positives from mid-career would extend into late career. So one common marker of mid-career ending was entering higher level management or administration, although they recognized that it was not necessarily the only factor, or perhaps even the end. Our participants hoped that in the late career, they would have the ability to achieve whatever they wanted to do in their careers on their own terms. As one participant said, I feel like late stagers they've done what they've wanted to do. They have the freedom to really do whatever. I feel like late career has less to do about the day-to-day work at the job and maybe more about looking at the field or looking at other initiatives or interests that you have that you could do as a librarian, but aren't going to be assigned by a supervisor. Another person said, everything is in the proportions that I want it to do, that I feel that best uses my talents. Then I think you've gone through mid-career and you're moving into career nirvana or whatever. So perhaps naturally, our participants viewed late career as a period of slowing down, which then leads to retirement, which was not always spoken about in the most positive way. Next slide, please. While some of our mid-career academic librarians of color said they were close to late career, most could only speak of what they have seen from others at this stage. One participant observed, I think the only examples I have are late stage career librarians, the ones who are beyond retirement age and are literally just holding on because they probably don't have much in retirement. Or there are a lot of older white ladies who are single and alone. This is their only connection to the community. I imagine late career is when I no longer want to volunteer for things, when I no longer want to present, which means I'm no longer doing extra things when I'm ready to just sit back and do the job that I'm paying for. I kind of feel that, and there's nothing wrong with that if you're still doing a good job. Another person was a bit more bleak, saying, so for me, I feel like it's almost a wasteland. Can we call it a wasteland? I think this is the point where people decide if they're going to fade into darkness and just exist until they retire or retire in place, as my colleagues used to say. Most participants saw the end of mid-career coinciding with retirement, but our participants said they did not really know themselves since they were not at that stage. I am skeptical that the moment mid-career ends, you retire. I hope that there is more to late career than just kicking back and collecting your salary, even if we have seen some examples of that in our workplaces. One person was similarly optimistic, saying, I think that says something about the field that if people are having a hard time saying, well, this is what late career looks like. To me, that says librarianship is so dynamic and constantly changing. Unless you're the kind of person who's like, I hit this administrative goal or I reached full professor, I'm going to just sit on my laurels and coast until I retire. And I'm sure there are some people out there who choose to do that, but not the people I've encountered, and certainly not the librarians of color who I've encountered. So from our participants' descriptions of the different career stages, we do think that professional organizations should be intentional about defining and understanding these different stages. Institutions need to understand where someone is in their career and build in protections and additional supports so they feel like they are mid-career and want to stay. And individuals should reflect on when career stages shift and accept the way their work changes, such as mentoring, time to do special projects, and having increased confidence.
All right, y'all. In this section, I'll be discussing how the racial and ethnic identities of our interviewees have played, or continue to play a role in in their experiences as librarians. I'll also issue a trigger warning now at the top of this section because some of what I will talk about may be uncomfortable for those who've experienced similar things or have been marginalized in similar ways. It will also be uncomfortable for those of you who know you've participated in similar behavior. While the intention is not to chastise anyone, if something happens to make you uncomfortable here, I challenge you to sit with your discomfort and synthesize it after this presentation. If you are new to the subject matter, taking a look at our bibliography of resources for literature is a great place to start. Next slide, please. Questions we asked participants. How has your racial and ethnic identity influenced your career as a librarian? And also, Can you describe a situation at your workplace where you experience subtle or overt expressions of racism or prejudice? If so, how did you respond? The sections that follow include quoted answers to the questions just mentioned, and additionally contain identity-based challenges that may not be apparent to our majority identity colleagues. I also want to point out that while our original query sought to make distinctions about why mid-career BIPOC librarians stay or leave the profession, an additionally relevant theme that emerged from our interviews was that of career interruption and its effect on those who've chosen to stay as well. We'll start with how BIPOC identity affects academic library work. A participant said, "My identity definitely 100% influenced my career. Now that I'm looking at other positions, I think, is this a position I can continue to advocate for tribal libraries and tribal librarians? Because if I don't feel like they can support that, then I can't work there." Continued, "If I leave, I really doubt there will be another tribal member to take my position, and that's actually been part of my crisis. Do I continue to feel like I'm being mistreated for the rest of my life because I'm worried that what I've built in my community is going to be dismantled by a non-tribal member? Most people see this as being my library, and that's unfortunate because it's not. It's our library, but would a non-tribal member take care of it?" Moving on to BIPOC career interruptions. Here we've highlighted a few costs that BIPOC have to face that others do not. There are literal costs of what I'm choosing to call career clock time, lessened earning potential, and getting stuck in the paying dues phase of gig librarianship. Institution bouncing also comes with literal costs such as moving expenses, and in a profession with the culture of reimbursement, librarians of color who are more likely to be first generation undergrads, graduate students, and then faculty can't always afford to institution bounce for both financial and personal reasons. To take on this normal expense for career advancement, librarians of color often have to take on moving related debt and place themselves in other financial precarity to get to the positions that are career stepping stones. And then lastly, participants mentioned feelings of assumption during interview processes about the ability to succeed or during the course of work that simply felt unsafe. They felt as though they were being judged as less competent for coming from lesser library or position type, like term, non-tenure track, or staff, or like they were expected to be the diverse solution for an institution to swoop in and fix the diversity quota. We had numerous participants mention that they felt something was off at a place they interviewed and so didn't proceed even if offered a position because the cringe was so strong. Next, we'll talk about politics. So when referring to politics within librarianship, we're talking about the often hidden rules and game playing necessary to get ahead, curry favor, or to be championed or selected. In academic libraries, this can look like displaying or not knowing how to properly display concepts such as collegiality, professionalism, competence, and involvement, or how to skirt the lines of behaviors like factionalism, territorialism, or self-promotion. We'll begin with a quote about navigating the politics of academia in the form of gatekeeping. "I think on some level, and this is probably across the board, you've got administrators, deans, department heads that need to just go. They're holding stuff up, they're trying to do things the old way, and they're getting in the way of progress. There's just a lot of hanging on and getting in the way. That was disappointing." Next one, speaking of residencies. Yeah, so the residency was a faculty librarian position, so I had to do all the tenure and promotion stuff, but it didn't count for anything. So if I would have been hired, I would have had to restart my clock. Then I was out on the market. In my next job, I was actually hired temporarily to fill a sabbatical gap. My ranking never changed because I wasn't there long enough. When referring to professionalism, the biggest stressor for me was definitely figuring out all of these unwritten rules that I didn't know and having to stumble my way through how to dress, how to look, how to talk, what you can say and cannot say, that sort of business professionalism, but to the extreme in academic librarianship. And as far as navigating academia is bizarre land, and you're trying to do it without looking like you don't know what you're doing because you already have imposter syndrome, or whatever we call it, forced imposter syndrome in a way. So the takeaways from this section: professional organizations need to stop encouraging temporary short-term jobs for BIPOC librarians that keep them in the early career stage longer than their white counterparts. Institutions need to be more transparent about politics, bureaucracy, policies, processes, and the hidden curriculum of culture. And lastly, individuals need to actively share information Stop the competitive and scarcity mindsets of academia and collaborate.
Okay, so we directly asked all participants to tell us about someone who supported or greatly helped them during their careers, and we heard many anecdotes about what we're calling champions. These are mentors, informal mentors, peer mentors, and role models throughout the interviews. These people are essential to keeping librarians of color in academic libraries, but I'm going to start with the 4 people who left. So this participant followed the path library organizations and institutions say and think will lead to retention. He was involved in recruitment programs through ALA, ACRL, and ARL. He attended the Minnesota Institute. He did a residency and he published a lot. And when we asked him who supported or helped him during his career, the only people he could think of was his family. He mentioned that he was assigned mentors and he referenced having a lot of access to his library dean. But in our entire interview, the only specific example of support he made was that people wrote him letters of recommendation. If you are a white librarian and all you have done for your BIPOC colleagues is write a letter of recommendation, you are not doing enough. Another participant said, I just think what they saw in me wasn't the same thing that I saw for myself or for the larger profession. And as a result, I've burned a number of bridges. This participant was also part of the recruiting programs through Spectrum and ARL. And through these programs, their interest in critical librarianship, they described having relationships with many library thought leaders whose names you would probably know, but they did not feel seen or supported by these people who should have been mentors. It is so important for mentors or champions to really know their mentees, so they aren't just throwing them random opportunities, but helping them get the right opportunities for their specific career path. This person said, my peer mentor increased my self-esteem so much that I was like, oh, I'm awesome. I can leave this field. I don't need them. They can make me feel like I'm not good enough, but I am good enough and I can do it and I can leave. And their greatest supporter was a peer mentor who was in the same career stage. Together, they found out about conferences, crafted proposals, and gave presentations, and they had absolutely no other support from colleagues, supervisors, or mentors. And our last person who left said, I've been fortunate that I've had some good mentors. My assigned mentor just let me flourish, built on my strengths, and helped direct me where I needed to go. My peer mentor provided me that honest feedback and direction without any motive behind except my personal self-interest. So she is very much my backbone that keeps me in librarianship. This participant identifies having multiple mentors who fulfill different roles in her career, and she specifically says that this is the reason why she has stayed, even though she was not retained in higher education. So I analyzed all of the people who stayed, and I was able to identify champions. And these are people who are mostly white librarians, because we know librarianship is mostly white, and librarians with institutional power are even more mostly white. So what do champions know how to do? They know how to listen. And this is the most important thing, like I said, they're not just throwing random opportunities, especially things they don't want, especially tokenizing diversity things. They listen and they know the librarian. They know their goals and their strengths. They ask questions, answer questions, give advice, commiserate, and they know when to do which one because they know the librarian that they are championing. They are encouraging and see the librarian's potential and use that information to continually boost their confidence in their work. Confidence boosting was actually considered the #1 thing that we got from people who supported their careers. They do this formally through writing nominations for awards and letters of support for opportunities. They will always be a glowing reference because they want what is best for the person, not the institution. They inform and share information about ALA, ACRL, the ethnic affiliates, leadership development programs, conference opportunities, service opportunities, academia, tenure, and the institution they work for. They are especially helpful when they share unspoken rules or unwritten norms, which are often passed down through generations of professionalism that many BIPOC librarians didn't have access to because of generations of racism in the United States and Canada. They strategize and help librarians plan out their careers based on their goals and always, always, always help them earn more money. They support by putting the librarian's name in the ears of powerful people and advocating for them. When someone is looking for a person, they act as a sponsor for the librarian to be that person. When they are offered an opportunity that would benefit the other librarian more, they decline the opportunity and recommend that person instead. They connect. They're able to introduce librarians to other people and help them network. Several participants specifically mentioned that their champion helped them navigate conferences like ACRL, taking them to different sessions and introducing them to people they needed to meet. And finally, they collaborate. Tenure track participants mentioned the importance of having a mentor who could walk them through the research process, while our non-tenure track people also enjoyed participating in research because it boosted their confidence. Many participants said publishing was the professional accomplishment that they were the most proud of. Other participants were able to serve on committees or join projects or communities of practice or develop their skills because a champion advocated for their participation. So, our takeaways. Professional organizations and workplaces need to train mentors how to be champions. Too many of our participants did have assigned mentors, but those were not necessarily the people they identified as being greatly supportive of their careers. Individuals need to step up and do the work. Our champions were usually white. They were often in different institutions and sometimes in different institution types completely. So there is no excuse for not championing your BIPOC librarian colleagues. All right, our next session is about community. We asked all participants what professional support groups, whether informal or formal, that they are a part of. So these are quotes from them describing what it was like to be in a space with other librarians of color. The male librarian of color community can be very small, which makes those relationships very precious. It was amazing to just be surrounded by so many people that you could connect with and identify. It's hard to go through these conferences when they are so white. We have a place where we can just kind of breathe and not have to always be on guard. I feel better having those conversations with people of color. White leftists, I just can't. We asked our participants if they had any advice for early career librarians on how to survive and thrive in academic librarianship, and 75% of them said something about finding your community. And unlike champions, almost all participants said that community needs to be with other librarians of color. So special shout outs were given to ALA Spectrum, the Minnesota Institute, and the Kaleidoscope program, of course. But some of our participants didn't find out about these programs until they had aged out of them career-wise. Some didn't apply because they weren't interested in leadership, and some could not apply because they didn't have administrative support. People also mentioned conferences and conference programs associated with the 5 ethnic affiliates, which are listed here if you don't know, and their combined conference, JCLC. However, participating in conferences requires funding and the ability to take time off of work. These two factors make these opportunities unrealistic for many people, including parents, especially single parents, or librarians working at small institutions like community colleges or tribal libraries, or any of the many institutions that don't offer robust professional development funding. And this was specifically mentioned by one participant. They said now they don't have money for travel, but back when they did, there was a good deal of emphasis on what did you learn and how will you apply it to your institution. And I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to say, I went to the Black Librarians Caucus and how I'm going to apply it is I'm going to keep my sanity. I'm going to keep my mental health. Many participants mentioned we here, of course, the community that inspired the title of this presentation. If you're a BIPOC librarian, you should definitely connect. They have free virtual communities for us only. So professional organizations need to do more for BIPOC librarians at different career stages and with different career aspirations, and they need to have virtual versions of everything. Institutions need to give extra travel and professional development money to BIPOC librarians so that they're not torn between attending ACRL right now or JCLC last month. If an institution only has a few BIPOC librarians, they need to give extra funding to those librarians so they can go to places like JCLC or POC and LIS. If an institution is in a predominantly white town or is a predominantly white institution, they need to give extra funding to their BIPOC librarians so they can have a chance to go where the people are. Individuals, specifically white individuals, need to vocally support their institutions giving extra travel and professional development money to their BIPOC colleagues. It is fair. It is equitable. Institutions don't do this because they are more concerned with how white librarians would feel about BIPOC librarians getting more money than they are concerned with BIPOC people's lived experience of racism, which is still happening in 2023.
And unfortunately, that leads into my next section about libraries, librarians, and racism. In this section, I'll be letting the experiences and direct quotes of interviewees speak mostly for themselves. The things you'll see in here have happened across institution types, different career levels, and different areas of the US and Canada, and by BIPOC librarians of all racial and ethnic, and also other intersectional and cultural types. So I want to keep that in mind. I'd like to re-refer to my trigger warning from above because, to be honest, this is where it gets pretty rough. Please appreciate the vulnerability and bravery displayed by those who chose to share some of these moments with us. And I would even go a step further to say, imagine if you had to hear these things over and over and over again in your place of work, and you're supposed to continue acting professional with people who have and sometimes intentionally do harm to you on a consistent basis. Whether it feels comfortable to hear or not, these experiences happen daily to librarians across the US and Canada. So while you will see that the libraries are racist is the slide title, the implication is explicit for those who display this behavior as well, either knowingly or unknowingly. We had a faculty staff dining room on campus. There was apparently a long-standing group of faculty, white faculty, who always sat at this one particular table. Well, they weren't there yet, and I put my tray down and started to sit down at this table, and this older white man said to me, "This room is reserved for faculty and staff only." My first day, they had a welcoming party where a bunch of staff were invited to attend, and I was the only Black person in the room. And the two colleagues were talking, and the manager said, "Well, I'm not going to hold you to some ridiculous standard. I'm not a slave driver." I go to work every day with racists. I know that. However, they have been very, very good at not showing that to me. I have not had any situations where I felt that I was personally dealing with discrimination, but I wait for it every day. So there's always this level of tension where I'm like, is today the day they're going to really show me who they are? I had a hard time making friends. You know, it was depressing. It was really isolating. So maybe things would have been different if my location were different, but who knows? It may not have been that different elsewhere. I think another thing that's really hard is that I've never really learned how to respond to is when people are like, "Oh, I thought you were a guy," because I've only seen your name. Or they'll send me emails to Mr. X. I never respond to an email that starts with Mr. X. I don't care how professional of the person it is, they're not professional enough to tread carefully. All right, next we'll talk about humanity and personhood. And I made a title slide for this because I want to stop for a second and talk about the concept of being mixed up with another colleague and how it was one of the most dehumanizing experiences reported across all of our participants. A close second or third were that of isolation or totally being ignored by people who are supposed to be collegial, as just highlighted in the previous slides. This means some of our colleagues in this profession cannot be bothered to recognize enough personal traits of an individual human being for long enough to acknowledge that their personhood is different from someone else's. That is shameful, to say the least, and definitely a definitive reason why people move on, which we will discuss at publication. In the next few slides, you'll see the experiences of a single person at a single institution and their realizations at different points in their career. Institutional longevity and mid-career status does not always equal being known or acknowledged, as you will see. There are incidents where I was mistaken for the other Chinese male in the library. I was congratulated for getting married. I thought, I didn't get married. What are you talking about? I don't even have a partner yet. And then this is where the associate university librarian who's new says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were this other person." I've started to realize that this has become an issue in my institution quite a bit in terms of racialized librarians. I was just recently looking at the salary list that we have in our institution. I thought, whoa, this is quite interesting compared to other colleagues that are in the same years of service that have substantially higher pay. We have a merit system at our institution that has been a hindrance in my career that I'm starting to just unravel and learn more about. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. And lastly, over the course of 15 years, I've applied for internal positions that are ongoing that I haven't got, and a number of opportunities where there were interim positions of leadership, opportunities that were not given to me. I've been overlooked for opportunities for advancement. I think those are barriers in terms of confidence and pay. Libraries are really, really racist. The next quotes are about how libraries are really, really racist. I have to warn you that these were some of the hardest to hear and will be the hardest for me to read. People were always telling me I got opportunities because of my race. I heard that a lot. They never said because of your race, but they would say because you're diverse. Diverse is the new word to describe a BIPOC person. There's this sexualization of Hispanic women. Being in the library and having somebody come up to me and say something that they would never say to someone else. Oh, you're looking like a spicy Latina today, or wow, your ass looks really good in that skirt. One of our Middle Eastern participants said, when I came back from parental leave, everyone's like, oh, pictures. So I had this picture of my daughter in this onesie that my cousin had got me with a non-English script. And I had a colleague say, oh, raising militants already? Another participant said, now I have to pick and choose where I'm going to talk about race a little bit more because I don't want to not be taken seriously on bigger issues. BIPOC librarians bear the emotional labor of managing their colleagues' feelings and perceptions all of the time. They should not also have to split their professional identity from their lived experience and have that be a professional concern. Thanks. As far as takeaways, professional organizations need to move past toolkits and roadshows that focus on technical skills and EDI 101. Create training to address intercultural harmony without a participant price tag, so there's no excuse as to why people cannot learn how to be a better human to their colleagues with minoritized identities. Also, if you want folks of BIPOC identities to share their experiences in this endeavor, pay them. There is a cost to these interactions, so open up the coffers if you want them to revisit their emotional labor, pain, and trauma from trying to be the professionals you claim to represent. Second set of takeaways for institutions. Institutions need to recognize their culpability in these interactions by not having an action plan for when they happen, because they will and they do happen. Believe those who report this behavior. It is an extreme risk to do so. Don't insult them by doing nothing. And lastly, take swift, decisive action when this behavior is reported or overheard. Your employees do, in fact, have options to go outside of the library structure to get these situations resolved. Do you really want them to have to do that? And the takeaways for individuals. Individuals need to stop feigning ignorance and surprise when hearing about these experiences. Recognize and reckon with the fact that America has a racist history and we see evidence daily of its racist present. Racism is codified into so many of our systems. These slights should not be as shocking at this point. Secondly, seriously commit to showing all of your colleagues humane anti-racist treatment, period. And lastly, in your place of work, all of our place of work, no matter what your identity is, be an accomplice. Allyship isn't getting us anywhere.
Thank you, Brittany. So one question that we asked our participants directly was, what could organizations do to keep librarians of color in the profession? Although they gave many different suggestions, I will talk about the one area that came up most often, which is compensation. Nearly everyone we talked to said that librarians of color could be better retained through some sort of increase in compensation. It could be increasing salaries, additional professional development, or additional leave or flexible work. These were the most commonly suggested methods, but the other ideas included paying for moving or housing expenses, the library masters or other education, loans, or emotional labor. The most common refrain for retention was to simply pay more, with many participants saying tersely, pay us more. You can pay us. They really need to focus on pay equity. I think pay is important. Those who expanded on their answer said it was especially important for people of color. with one person saying, pay people for what they do, pay people appropriately for their work, and don't expect more out of them if you're not going to pay them. I think that's a big thing. I will tell you, I have reservations. I have always had reservations about recruiting more people of color into the field when we don't have enough jobs and the jobs don't pay well enough, and we're going to put you in debt because you went to graduate school for the field. So I wish that we would pay our people more. I think that's a really important thing. As Brittany mentioned earlier, community was a key component to sustaining the careers of our participants. Because of this, there was an emphasis on providing additional funding for professional development, especially for librarians of color. One person said, I need financial support to travel so I can be with my people. Because I'm in a very rural, very white area. Support means money for travel, money to take on opportunities in communities that are more diverse. Lastly, 2 participants were vocal advocates in increasing leave or having more flexible work. Once again, they thought it was especially important for people of color to have. These are very long quotes, but they emphasize why they said this. One person said, I think that we have to be more flexible around our policies around leave, like sick leave, and so that people can attend to their mental well-being as well. Because there are going to be some things, even in the most forward-thinking, progressive, inclusive library environment that you work in, you are still, as a person of color, dealing with all of the BS that's happening outside your library. That's an added layer of stress, anxiety, and harm that's on top. And so you have to have the ability to make space for yourself so that you can be healthy around those things. A participant who left academic libraries for a nonprofit organization shared that at their new place of work, they were able to have additional leave and flexible work, saying, mental health days would help too. This year, with all of the violence against communities happening, Black and Asian American and other folks, we got days off to process some of these things going on, and white people didn't. I love that. Sometimes I didn't take it. I didn't feel like it affected me. It wasn't for me, but sometimes I did. When stuff happened at the Capitol, we got a week to process that because we all felt we had this collective grief. That would never happen in an academic library, of course. But that isn't to say you can't take that and think of creative ways to do something like that in your own organization. This person continued, we also have a Black affinity group for employees, and they make recommendations about money, promotion, and benefits that the organization actually has listened to and then done. They recommended that we get 2 weeks of summer vacation extra, and they gave it to us. Do you know how morale boosting that is to not only get 2 extra weeks of summer vacation, but to know you actually listened to the Black affinity group? Based on this feedback, professional organizations can create additional funds for librarians of color. Institutions can increase compensation in any way available and be creative with pay, time off, and flexible work. And individuals can advocate for each other's compensation.
And as we sort of come to a close in our presentation, we're going to talk about how to do the work, but not performatively, which was summed up by a participant's quote that said, but did anything we create acknowledge the historical roots of white supremacy? Another participant said, I do worry that because there has been a lot of attention on diversity in the last few years or so because of really big events that have happened, that there's a push forward for different organizations to put out statements that we stand against this and that, but will the actions that are following that continue to be important after the news cycle changes? After, oh, we've struck this committee, they produced recommendations, we did some of them, and yeah, that's fine. We looked at our policies, it's good, now we're anti-racist. So instead, we have some suggestions for how to do the work and be accountable for it. For instance, what has your organization done since it wrote its diversity statement? We're going to recommend that at the very least, a diversity statement needs a yearly review and update, if not an assessment of effectiveness. Exactly what did you do to meet or increase these goals? Who was involved? Is there an embedded time-bound deadline? Are you intentionally and actively recruiting BIPOC, neurodivergent people, second, third career librarians, or parents? If this is a goal, how are you making sure your processes are equitable? Is there a checklist or a rubric? If not, create one and actually use it, refine and improve it. This is the work. Have an idea of the burdens these identities add to candidates as they're going through a process like job application, and mitigate them where possible. There's plenty of literature like this presentation and eventual publication to consult. And then lastly, financially reward and create opportunities for job satisfaction for BIPOC librarians that is not moving up into leadership. We personally think that assessing and monitoring scope creep is a must. The burden for the charge of initiatives or the back-end bulk of the work, especially if it's EDI focused, is often unpaid and often falls to librarians of color. You should not expect this to be the norm. Along with this, you should be encouraging BIPOC librarians' goals to be created for their professional development or career trajectory and not just organizational betterment, and allowing their work to speak for their financial reward as opposed to making them shuck and jive to get extra money in various forms. Good work deserves reward. Don't make employees feel beholden to the institution because they are naturally excellent. And our takeaways. Professional organizations need to stop making announcements about statements and solidarity without accountability and teeth. What are additional ways you can be supporting BIPOC mid-career librarians? Who's doing this work other than us? Can you name them? If not, why not? Pay researchers to consult as you develop programming. Institutions need to stop forming committees, task forces, and book clubs where you talk about doing the work and stop creating more work to look busy addressing the issues. Just address them already. Use a rubric. Have a follow-up plan if an initiative misses the mark. And lastly, individuals, especially leaders and administrators, must offer official support from their positional perches, verbally and publicly, and model their own commitment to accountability around support for BIPOC librarians. So here is our extensive bibliography if you'd like to come back later and investigate for further research. Now we'll lean into Q&A. Thanks for listening to us, y'all.
All right, we're getting lots of thank yous. Melinda, this will be a recorded presentation, so it'll be out there also on my website, bpfiedler.com. I have a pretty extensive bibliography that's all about librarians of color in academia, since this is one of my research areas. Yes, we are planning on publishing extensively. Our next presentation will be at CALM. We are applying for POC and LIS, which is a small summit that's just for BIPOC librarians, where we'll have a slightly different conversation that we would only have amongst ourselves. So hopefully that comes in, and then we will be planning at least 3 publications. We did not even touch on imposter syndrome, which was, I don't know, about 20 minutes of every interview. We also asked participants directly, what can library organizations do to keep you? What could they have done to retain you for people who left? Yeah, and if you're interested in our related research, Brittany, Sterling, and I did a paper and presentation at ACRL 2021 called Conference Critique, which looks at the way that diversity, quote, diversity research and presentations have greatly increased in library conferences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anything has actually changed in library conferences. So for those of you who attend EDI related conference presentations, I think that research is really interesting.
We will take that.
Yes.
I don't want to mispronounce your name, but we will take that into account. And actually, if no one else has a question, we'll get to what was the conference you mentioned. But if anyone has suggestions of other things you'd like us to investigate, we're game for that as well.
Yeah, so Michelle asks if we're considering doing a study on later career librarians. And yes, we would love to talk to the people who made it, the survivors, people who got there Although depending on how you define late career, you know, we did have people in our interviews who had 20 years of library experience, but still considered themselves to be mid-career. Yeah, and I think that those intersections, right, of ageism and racism, of ability and racism, of body size and racism, all of those are things, you know, obviously trans identities and racism right now, well, always are experiencing that intersectional oppression, but right now we're receiving a lot of media attention highlighting that intersectional oppression. Yeah, so those are all factors that we would love to see further research on.
Yeah, and late career was especially interesting to me because, like I said earlier, just people seem so negative about it. And there must be something more to that stage, right? And so I thought, and some people actually explicitly said it would be a great area of further research because there just isn't much about that, like there isn't much about mid-career. So that's definitely something any of us could look forward to looking more into.
Yeah, and Brittany, I would love for you to maybe address the question about the idea of perfectionism and having to like perform perfectly. I feel like that came up in a lot of your sections.
Oh, yes. So just really briefly, I was going to sort of add this in, but this adds a caveat. Actually, what we found with some folks is, Brittany already talked about how all librarians don't want to ascend into leadership, right? And libraries are very hierarchical. And so a lot of folks discussed in my section sort of what does it mean to be excellent at your job and be fine being just a librarian, or like not wanting to be a department head or a manager or something like that. And actually, you'll be interested to know, I think I saw someone ask about the pressure to be perfect. One of the things that we really enjoyed hearing was a lot of our folks didn't feel that pressure anymore. They knew they were doing what they needed to do and often doing it much better than their majority identity colleagues. And by mid-career, they felt fine for claiming that and not trying to look like they needed to climb the ladder. So we will also get to that at publication.
Yeah, and I also feel like we saw that in, we didn't ask a question about politics, but it came up a lot, people feeling like they needed to navigate situations very politically minded, and that they weren't considered for certain opportunities because of those politics and their identities. And so I think that especially in early career, that really does that. Brittany and I have spent a lot of time thinking about how we present ourselves at conferences, present ourselves while we're teaching, present ourselves while we're working with faculty that our white colleagues necessarily don't have to consider. All right, we have a question that I feel like maybe is a James question. What is the plan to get around various salary EEO laws to justify salary differentials? I mean, we pay people different salaries for all kinds of reasons based on their experience and skills, but James, do you have any thoughts there?
No, and I don't remember any of our participants specifically talking about getting around the various laws specifically. There was just more of a general sentiment that, I mean, what we're getting paid currently or what we're getting compensated currently just isn't enough. And I think that some of the comments about being creative and looking for other ways of compensating someone could be maybe a way around actual increases in the salary. So like the time off, for example, or additional funding for travel and things like that.
And I'll just add as an aside for that one, not all institutions have this, but some institutions do have a pool of money for equity raises. And if you don't know if your institution has one, I highly recommend you do a quick search and see if that's the case, because especially if you've been doing very heavily EDI related work, we all know there's a emotional labor that comes with that, but it also looks good for our institutions to be putting their librarians of color forward and supporting them in doing this work. So you deserve money for that if you are doing that.
Yeah, Lily, I definitely think that we saw a lot of that job creep, which is not compensated. And it is particularly problematic when it's job creep around EDI. I think that the three of us have all seen that when we do EDI work, it's considered part of our jobs. And of course we would do it. And when our white colleagues do very similar or the same work, it's like, oh my gosh, they're such champions of BIPOC librarians. So like they kind of get credit because it's seen as going like above and beyond in a way that for us, it's not. Yeah, and I think that that's really hard, and I think that's how we see people leaving. They just, I would say 2 of the people we interviewed who left are people that if you knew who they were, you would be like, oh, they're library rock stars. They are people who are just they were doing so much. And I think that's where those champions come in, right? I had a really wonderful white boss who, when she gave me one new thing, it was like, what are we taking away? Or if she gave me an opportunity, something else was taken away. She was very cognizant of looking at our department and rearranging job duties. And I don't know that supervisors always do that.
I will also add, Lily, I'm dealing with this right now. I have no problem saying that. And there comes a point where you get to say, I'm not going to do this anymore. It doesn't mean that I'm going to rage quit tomorrow, but we need to have a plan for fall, or we need to have a plan for next spring. Who else is going to take on these responsibilities? But I feel like I can now say that, as I would say, I think I'm firmly mid-career. So I also understand, like, not necessarily feeling like you can say that at the beginning.
Yeah, and really quickly, we're at time, but Lily, something we did cut was so many of our participants had talked about the dreams and aspirations, or the grass is greener on the other side type of comments. And so many people just wanted to leave, but still haven't made that jump yet. And so I think, while job creep that's uncompensated, I think we all knew that was something happening, or our participants knew that was happening, and they just started thinking more and more about just leaving.
All right, we really appreciate you all being here. It's important to us that we have these conversations and that you're listening.
Yes, thank you so much. I guess that means we're free, James. I will see you later. Bye.